They laughed, but high above the Reich, there was no laughter.
We've got company! Get those masks secured! Fighters is at 12 o'clock! High!
They laughed in the mess halls of the Luftwaffe. They laughed at the new American fighter, calling it a toy, a plane unworthy of serious combat. But high above the Reich, inside the freezing aluminum skin of a B-17, there was no laughter. There was only the thunder of the engines, the rattling of machine guns, and the cold, creeping dread of what was to come. The sky over Germany in late 1943 wasn't just a battlefield. It was a graveyard in the making. Imagine yourself there, thousands of feet above the earth, watching the contrails of your fellow bombers stretch out like white scars across the blue. Below, a black sea of flak erupts in angry bursts, tearing through wings and fuselages. And then, right on cue, they arrive, the Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, swooping in with ruthless precision the moment your escorts turn for home. This was the brutal truth. American daylight raids were unsustainable. The losses were staggering. A nightmare laid bare during the Schweinfurt raid, where over 60 bombers were shot down in a single day. More than 600 airmen lost. The problem wasn't courage, it was distance. The bombers were flying beyond the reach of their protectors. At some invisible line drawn across the sky, the P-47 seconds and P-38 seconds had to turn back, leaving the bombers alone, defenseless. And the Luftwaffe was always waiting. The entire Allied strategy was bleeding out, threatening to collapse under the weight of its own losses. But what if the solution was already out there, waiting in the wings? An overlooked, underestimated aircraft, born from a desperate British request, was about to be transformed into the one weapon that could alter the course of the war. A plane that would silence the laughter for good. To understand how this one fighter could carry the weight of an entire strategy on its wings, you must first hear its incredible origin story. If you believe history is written by those who dare to defy the odds, subscribe and stay with us, because the story of the P-51 Mustang is just getting started. But before the Mustang took its rightful place in history, we have to understand where it came from and why no one, not even the Americans, expected it to become the savior of the skies when the British first approached North American aviation. In 1940, the request was simple on paper, but desperate in reality. Build us a fighter. Britain was straining under the weight of the war, and the Royal Air Force needed aircraft fast. What the company produced was the P-51 Mustang, a sleek design with promise, but not yet the stuff of legend. Its first versions were armed, agile at low altitude, but lacked the high-altitude performance needed to take on the Luftwaffe. At that stage, it was considered useful, but nothing more for the Americans. The Mustang wasn't even the priority. They already had their stalwarts, the rugged P-47 Thunderbolt and the twin-engine P-38. Lightning both had proven themselves, but neither had the ability to escort bombers deep into Germany. And so the Mustang sat in relative obscurity, a side project, not yet a centerpiece. The transformation happened with one decision, fitting the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine into the airframe. Suddenly, aircraft wasn't just fast, it was a predator. The Merlin engine gave it the climb rate to meet German fighters head-on at high altitude, the speed to break free when it needed to, and most importantly, the endurance to fly where no other escort could go with external fuel tanks. The Mustang could fly to Berlin, cover the bombers through the target, and still return to England. Even then, there were doubts. Some American officials questioned whether a new fighter was worth the resources. The Luftwaffe had been underestimated before, and many thought that no single aircraft could change the balance. Meanwhile, German pilots were still dismissive to them. The Mustang was just another Allied experiment, another toy that would fall short once it met their Me 262 seconds, or Focke-Wulf 190 seconds. In combat, their laughter carried an arrogance, a belief that their tactics tried and tested against bombers were unbeatable. But in the airfields of England, a combat any abcessed. Different mood was building. Bomber crews who had been suffering catastrophic losses began to hear whispers of a new escort fighter. They didn't care about engineering, jargon, or airframe specifications. All they cared about was whether this aircraft could stick with them when the mission crossed that deadly invisible line, the point where the thunderbolts and lightnings had to turn back. Will it stay with us all the way? They asked. The answer soon enough would be yes, there. Was also something psychological at play. The men who climbed into Mustangs for the first time described it as slipping into a machine that wanted to fight with them, not against them. The cockpit felt tight, intimate, like you were strapped to a thoroughbred instead of sitting inside a machine. Test pilots in Britain had already realized its potential, and when the Merlin engine-powered version took to the skies, the reactions were immediate. It wasn't just another plane, it was a revelation. The timing couldn't have been more critical in late 1943, with the Schweinfurt losses fresh in everyone's memory. Morale within the 8th Air Force was fraying if the daylight bombing campaign collapsed. The RAFT entire Allied strategy of crippling German industry from the air could falter. The Mustang arrived like an answer to a prayer, though at first, many didn't yet realize just how decisive that answer would be. By December of 1943, squadrons equipped with the P-51B were beginning to arrive in Europe. Pilots, many of them fresh from the United States, were eager but untested. The Luftwaffe still owned the skies, and every mission carried risk. Yet once the Mustangs joined the bomber streams, something shifted. They didn't turn back where the others had to. They stayed diving on interceptors that had grown used to free rein. Once the escorts withdrew, German pilots who had once mocked the plane began to encounter it in combat. They saw its speed in a climb, its ability to stick to their tails, and its persistence deep over the rick. For the first time, the hunters felt hunted. The laughter began to fade. The birth of the Mustang was not a tavy, clean or simple story. It was born out of desperation, out of necessity, and out of a partnership between American manufacturing and British engineering. But it would soon prove itself not just as another fighter in the war, but as the one that could alter its direction. But building a great fighter on paper is one thing. Proving it in combat against a confident enemy and under the worst conditions imaginable was something else entirely. And that test would come soon enough during the brutal days of Big Week in early 1944, when the first squadrons of P-51 Mustangs arrived in England in late 1943. They did not make a dramatic entrance. There was no parade, no immediate fanfare. They simply rolled onto airfields like Debden and Leiston, their aluminum skins gleaming under the gray English sky. But for the bomber crews of the 8th Air Force, their appearance was the quiet beginning of a shift that would soon change everything. The men inside. The bombers had grown used to the gut-wrenching ritual of losing comrades. They knew the routine. Once the P-47s or P-38s reached their range limit and turned back, they would steel themselves for the inevitable storm. German fighters would rise in waves, circling like sharks until the escort was gone. Every man knew that silence on the intercom, the sudden cut of a voice mid-sentence, meant another friend was gone. What they needed was not a promise, but proof. Could this new fighter truly stay with them through the worst? That proof came quickly on a frigid January morning in 1944. A formation of B-17s flying towards central Germany found themselves under attack near Oschersleben. Messerschmitt dove in head on firing streams of cannon shells that ripped into bomber after bomber in the past. This was when the escorts would have been gone, leaving the bombers helpless. But this time, Mustang stayed with the PAZ. Stream. When the German fighters pressed too close, P-51s came screaming down from above their six. When the guns finally fell silent across Europe in May 1945, the wreckage of the Luftwaffe littered airfields across Germany. Burned out Messerschmitts sat abandoned on cracked runways, their machinery twisted and broken. Above it all lingered the undeniable legacy of the P-51 Mustang. The fighter that had not just entered the war, but had fundamentally rewritten its rules. But the Mustang story was always more than statistics. Behind the thousands of enemy aircraft destroyed were the countless bomber crews who made it home, the men who stepped off their battered planes onto solid ground. Instead of becoming just another name on a casualty list, for them, the Mustang wasn't a weapon, it was a lifeline. For the pilots who flew it, It was a trusted partner in the deadliest dance on Earth. And for the German pilots who faced it, it became a shadow in the sky, a symbol of an inevitability they could no longer escape. The moral of this story stretches beyond aviation. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest innovations are born from desperation, and that the most underestimated solutions can change the world. It's a testament to the fact that even when a challenge seems insurmountable, persistence, adaptation, and the right partnership can turn the tide. But it is also a story of immense sacrifice. For every victory, there was a cost, paid by young men on both sides of the conflict. Today, when a P-51 Mustang streaks across the sky at an air show, its Merlin engine still roaring with that unmistakable sound, it is more than just a piece of history. It's the echo of courage, the sound of survival, and a tribute to a generation who fought in the darkest of skies. The laughter that once filled the halls of the Luftwaffe was long gone, drowned out by the engine of a plane they called a toy. If you believe these stories of sacrifice and innovation must be remembered, and that the lessons of the past should guide our future, then join our community. Subscribe so that these voices are never forgotten. Because the story of the Mustang proves one timeless truth: hope can endure, and even in the face of impossible odds, victory is always possible.